Evelyn was enjoying a peaceful Saturday afternoon, the sort she had always envisioned when she moved to Willow Creek. She had chosen this neighborhood not just for its friendly, quiet atmosphere, but because it was the kind of place that would allow her golden retriever, Max, the space and freedom he needed. Max was her loyal companion, a big-hearted, gentle dog who had been by her side through thick and thin. After years of living in cramped apartments and enduring long work hours, Evelyn had finally found the perfect home with a spacious backyard for Max to roam freely, barking only occasionally to show his excitement when he spotted a squirrel or a passing bird. For Evelyn, this backyard had become a sanctuary for both her and Max, a private space filled with memories of shared sunsets and quiet mornings with coffee in hand and Max napping beside her feet. But on this particular Saturday, as Evelyn was about to take a sip of her coffee, she noticed something unusual in her mailbox. Among the usual assortment of bills and junk mail was a crisp white envelope embossed with the Willow Creek Homeowners Association logo. Curiously, Evelyn opened it, her eyebrows knitting together as she skimmed the letter. The opening lines were formal and dry, but it didn't take long for the message to hit her like a slap across the face. Dear Miss Parker, it has come to our attention that your pet, identified as a golden retriever, has been causing a disturbance within the community due to frequent barking. This behavior has led to complaints from other residents. As such, we are issuing a formal request for you to ensure that your dog is supervised at all times while outside and to minimize instances of barking as it disrupts the peace of the neighborhood. Evelyn blinked, rereading the lines, struggling to process the words. Max? A disturbance? She couldn't recall a single time he had barked excessively. He was a mild-mannered dog by nature, rarely barking unless something unusual caught his attention, like a neighbor's cat or a squirrel darting across the fence line. And even then, his barking was more of a playful woof or two rather than anything sustained or disruptive. After taking a deep breath, Evelyn carefully folded the letter, feeling a wave of indignation starting to rise. What kind of neighbor would find Max's presence a disturbance? And more importantly, why hadn't they simply come to her directly if it was such an issue? She thought about her interactions with her immediate neighbors. The elderly couple next door often stopped to pet Max on their way to the park, and the young family across the street had even invited her and Max to their kids' outdoor birthday party a few weeks back. She couldn't imagine any of them filing a complaint. Shaking her head, Evelyn decided to brush it off. It must have been a misunderstanding. Surely the homeowner association was just being overly cautious. Over the next few days, Evelyn noticed herself becoming more aware of Max's behavior. Whenever he barked, she would immediately check her watch, making a mental note of the time and duration. She started to feel a little on edge, worrying that every bark might be evidence for this supposed disturbance the homeowner association mentioned. It was a strange feeling, this sense of being watched, and it made her feel like a stranger in her own home. A week later, just as she thought the matter might blow over, another letter arrived. This time it was less polite. Dear Miss Parker, we are disappointed to note that despite our previous notice, there has been no visible effort to curb your dog's disruptive barking. We remind you that Willow Creek is a peaceful community that values the quiet and comfort of all residents. Should this behavior continue, further action may be taken, which may include fines or mandatory restrictions on the use of your backyard space for your pet. Evelyn's frustration turned into a determined resolve. If the homeowner association wanted to accuse her and Max, she would need to be prepared to defend them both. She called her closest neighbors, the elderly couple next door, and the young family across the street, to see if any of them had experienced an issue with Max's barking. To her relief, each one was shocked to hear about the complaints and assured her they had never been bothered by Max. In fact, they all adored him and appreciated his friendly presence. Feeling encouraged, Evelyn decided to take it a step further. She began keeping a record of every time Max barked, jotting down the time, duration, and reason whenever possible. She documented any sound that might have caused him to bark: a passing truck, a loud motorcycle revving down the street, or even the occasional chatter of neighborhood kids playing outside. She wasn't the kind to obsess over details, but this wasn't just about Max, it was about preserving the sanctuary they had both worked so hard to create. As the weeks went by, Evelyn found herself in a peculiar routine. she'd watch Max as he bounded through the backyard, keeping one ear open for any barks and making a quick note on her phone whenever he did. The process felt strange, almost surreal, but she convinced herself that it was necessary. If she had to stand up against the homeowner association, she'd need concrete evidence to show that Max's barking was reasonable and infrequent. One evening, as she was wrapping up a day of work, Evelyn received an unexpected knock on her door. Opening it, she found a woman she recognized vaguely as one of the newer residents on her block, a tall, slender woman with a perfectly tailored suit and a severe expression. She introduced herself as Linda Thompson and, with an air of self-assured authority, explained that she was the new homeowner association representative for their neighborhood. Linda wasted no time getting to the point. "Miss Parker, I wanted to speak to you directly about the recent complaints concerning your dog," she said, her tone clipped and brisk. Evelyn felt herself stiffen, but she maintained her composure, calmly inviting Linda inside. As they sat down, Linda produced a small notepad from her purse and began to read out a list of dates and times when Max had supposedly been heard barking. The sheer pettiness of the list times, like 2:13 p.m. or 4:26 p.m., made Evelyn's blood boil. She wanted to argue, to explain that a few barks in the middle of the day were not unreasonable for a dog. But Linda, with her rigid posture and disapproving gaze, didn't seem interested in hearing Evelyn's perspective. "You must understand," Linda said in a tone that implied Evelyn couldn't possibly understand, "that we have a responsibility to maintain the peace and quiet of this neighborhood. As homeowners, we all agree to these guidelines, and as the newest member of the homeowner association, I take this responsibility very seriously." Evelyn bit back a retort, reminding herself to stay calm. "I understand that, Miss Thompson, but Max is a well-behaved dog. He only barks occasionally and never at night. I've even been keeping a record of his barking to ensure he's not disturbing anyone." Linda's eyes narrowed slightly as she regarded Evelyn. "And yet we've received complaints. If the barking continues, I'll be forced to recommend further actions, possibly including restrictions on your backyard use." As Linda left, Evelyn felt a surge of determination rise within her. This wasn't just about Max anymore, it was about standing up to the arbitrary demands of an homeowner association that seemed more concerned with enforcing power than preserving the character of their community. Linda's rigid demeanor and disregard for Evelyn's side of the story only strengthened her resolve. In the days that followed, Evelyn doubled down on her documentation efforts. She even set up a small camera facing her backyard to capture footage of Max, showing how rarely he barked and how short-lived his barking was. She knew she'd need as much evidence as possible if she wanted to take on Linda and the homeowner association, and she wasn't about to let them bully her and Max into submission. The battle lines had been drawn. Evelyn was prepared to defend her home, her companion, and the peaceful life she had worked so hard to create at Willow Creek, even if it meant going head-to-head with the homeowner association. As the days went on, Evelyn's frustration with the homeowner association only deepened. Despite her diligent record-keeping and the hours she had spent reassuring herself that Max's behavior was within reason, the homeowner association continued to send her formal notices. Each one was colder and more intimidating than the last, filled with warnings of penalties and vague threats of further necessary measures should Max's supposed disturbances persist. Evelyn, who had once enjoyed peaceful days in her backyard, now found herself increasingly on edge. Every time Max barked, she flinched, immediately checking her watch and grabbing her notebook. The weight of the homeowner association's accusations was affecting not only her sense of comfort but also her relationship with her beloved dog. On a drizzly Tuesday morning, Evelyn's phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Linda Thompson, the homeowner association representative who had come to her home last week. The subject line read, "Formal notice of ongoing disturbance." Evelyn's heart sank as she opened the email, her eyes scanning the all-too-familiar phrasing. "Dear Miss Parker, we regret to inform you that there have been continued complaints regarding the disturbance caused by your pet. This is your final warning. If these issues are not resolved within the next 30 days, the homeowner association will be forced to implement sanctions, including but not limited to restricted use of your backyard, and a potential fine of $500 for each recorded instance of disturbance beyond the acceptable threshold. Evelyn's hands clenched. "Restricted use of my backyard?" she muttered, incredulous. The very idea that someone would dictate her ability to let her own dog enjoy their outdoor space felt absurd. She knew she had to do something drastic if she was going to keep this escalating pressure from impacting her daily life and her bond with Max. Determined, Evelyn decided to shift her approach from defense to offense. If the homeowner association was going to treat her and Max as a disturbance, then she would make sure they understood exactly how unfairly they were acting. That evening, she reached out to her neighbors, the ones who had reassured her earlier, to see if they'd be willing to write statements supporting Max. Miss Hathaway, the elderly woman who lived next door, was the first to respond. "Oh, darling, of course. Max is a joy. He doesn't disturb me one bit. Quite the opposite. I love seeing him out there," she said warmly when Evelyn stopped by with a request. Within 2 days, Evelyn had 5 statements in hand, each signed by a neighbor who attested to Max's good behavior. Most of them expressed disbelief that the homeowner association would target such a gentle dog. But Evelyn knew that written statements might not be enough, so she decided to install a noise-detecting camera that could monitor Max's barking. This camera was programmed to record only when sounds reached a certain decibel level, ensuring it would capture Max's barks in real time and provide a timeline of his activities. She set it up in the corner of her backyard, making sure it was angled to capture the entire yard and fence, where Max would usually bark at squirrels or the occasional neighborhood cat. For the first few days, Evelyn couldn't help but feel self-conscious about the camera. She watched every recording in detail, noting when and why Max barked. What she found only strengthened her belief that the homeowner association's complaints were baseless. Max would bark for no more than a few seconds, usually at harmless neighborhood noises like kids playing or a car honking. The recordings clearly showed that he was not causing any prolonged disruption. Feeling validated, Evelyn organized the recordings by date and prepared a detailed report to present to the homeowner association, showing that Max's barking was brief, infrequent, and well within reasonable limits. But as she continued her documentation, Evelyn noticed something odd. While reviewing the footage from one afternoon, she spotted a man she didn't recognize standing near her fence, peering into her yard. He was dressed in casual clothes, but his presence seemed too deliberate to be random. Her heart raced as she watched him linger near the fence, glancing around as though he was trying not to be noticed. Max barked at the stranger, who quickly walked away, disappearing down the street. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. Who was this person? And could he have something to do with the homeowner association's sudden fixation on Max? Determined to get to the bottom of this, Evelyn decided to confront Linda at the next homeowner association meeting. The monthly meetings were held in a small, beige community center near the neighborhood's entrance, a place she usually avoided, preferring to stay out of homeowner association politics. But this time she was prepared. She arrived at the meeting with her notebook, the camera recordings, and her neighbor's statements. Her plan was to make a case not just for Max, but against the homeowner association's harassment tactics. As Evelyn entered the meeting room, she immediately spotted Linda, sitting at the head of a long conference table, her expression as stern as ever. A few other homeowner association board members were seated around her, shuffling papers and talking in low voices. Evelyn's neighbors, who had agreed to accompany her, entered behind her, taking seats along the back wall. As the meeting began, Evelyn waited patiently, clutching her evidence in her lap. After the usual formalities, Evelyn raised her hand, signaling her intention to address the board. Linda looked at her, a hint of irritation flickering in her eyes, but she nodded for Evelyn to proceed. "Thank you for allowing me to speak," Evelyn began, trying to keep her tone steady. She explained her situation calmly, presenting her evidence one piece at a time. First, she showed the noise detection logs from her camera, explaining how they proved Max's barks were infrequent and brief. Then she presented her neighbor's statements, each of which attested to Max's good behavior and expressed surprise at the homeowner association's complaints. Linda listened with a tight-lipped expression, occasionally exchanging glances with the other board members. When Evelyn finished, she looked at Linda, waiting for a response. "Miss Parker," Linda said, her tone icy. "While we appreciate your efforts, this isn't just about numbers and logs. It's about maintaining the peace and harmony of this neighborhood. Your dog's barking, regardless of frequency, has caused discomfort for some residents. We cannot ignore these complaints." Evelyn's frustration boiled over. "Who are these residents, Linda? Because I have spoken to my closest neighbors and none of them have complained. In fact, they're here tonight to support me." Linda shifted uncomfortably, her gaze flicking toward the back of the room where Evelyn's neighbors sat. Evelyn could see the momentary unease in her expression, but Linda quickly regained her composure. "The homeowner association is not obligated to reveal the identities of those who submit complaints," Linda replied, her voice firm. "We protect the privacy of all residents to ensure they feel comfortable raising concerns." Evelyn took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I understand that, Linda, but these complaints have affected my quality of life. I am being threatened with fines and restrictions based on vague accusations. I believe I have a right to know if these complaints are legitimate." The room fell silent as Evelyn's words hung in the air. Several board members looked at each other, seeming uncertain. Finally, one of them, an older man with a thoughtful expression, spoke up. "Perhaps we could review Miss Parker's evidence more thoroughly," he suggested. "It seems she has gone to great lengths to address this issue." Linda looked visibly displeased, but she nodded reluctantly. "Very well. We will review the evidence and discuss this further," she said, her tone curt. Evelyn felt a glimmer of hope as she left the meeting. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a step forward. She had made her case, and she knew the board members had seen the holes in Linda's argument. However, she still couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just complaints about Max. The memory of the stranger lingering by her fence haunted her thoughts, and she wondered if this was part of a larger scheme. In the days that followed, Evelyn kept a low profile, focusing on her work and trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. But her vigilance had only heightened. She kept her camera running at all times, determined to document every interaction in her backyard. Her once peaceful sanctuary had turned into a place of quiet surveillance, each rustle in the bushes or distant sound making her tense with anticipation. Then, one evening, Evelyn noticed something unsettling. While reviewing the day's recording, she spotted Linda herself near her fence, talking to the same stranger she had seen before. They exchanged a few words, glancing occasionally at Evelyn's backyard before Linda walked away, leaving the man standing there for a few moments longer. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Why would Linda be there? And why was she talking to this man? Evelyn couldn't ignore the implications. She realized that this wasn't just a series of complaints, there was something personal driving Linda's actions. Her suspicions deepened, and her resolve to protect her home and Max grew even stronger. If Linda was willing to go to these lengths, then Evelyn would need to be prepared for anything. The fight with the homeowner association had become a fight for her peace, her property, and her principles, and Evelyn was ready for the battle ahead. The days following Evelyn's discovery of Linda and the stranger near her fence were filled with a new sense of urgency. Evelyn felt like she was no longer just standing up for Max's right to enjoy the backyard, but also defending her own right to privacy and peace. The homeowner association's relentless campaign against her felt calculated, as if Linda were determined to make an example out of Evelyn, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger was somehow involved. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Evelyn spent her evenings researching homeowner association regulations and tenants' rights, preparing herself for whatever might come next. After a week of tense waiting, Evelyn received another notice from the homeowner association. This one, however, wasn't like the previous letters. Instead of warnings and threats, it was a formal invitation to attend a hearing before the homeowner association board. The notice stated that she was required to present her case in person and bring any supporting evidence to defend her position. Evelyn felt a surge of both anxiety and resolve. This was the moment she had been preparing for, but she knew she had to approach it strategically. On the day of the hearing, Evelyn arrived at the Homeowner Association's community center with a stack of documents, a USB drive containing video evidence from her backyard camera, and signed statements from her supportive neighbors. She was ready to argue her case, but she couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt as she approached the entrance. This wasn't just about her backyard anymore, it was about confronting the people who had made her life difficult and seeking justice for the unfair treatment she and Max had endured. Inside the small conference room, the homeowner association board members were seated around a large table, their faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism as they watched Evelyn walk in. Linda sat at the head of the table, her face carefully composed but her eyes betraying a hint of impatience. Evelyn noticed that the stranger she had seen near her fence was also there, sitting beside Linda with a stack of papers in front of him. His presence unnerved her, but she reminded herself to stay calm and focused. "Miss Parker," Linda began in a formal tone, "thank you for joining us today. We understand that you have some concerns regarding the recent complaints about your pet's behavior." Evelyn nodded, keeping her voice steady. "Yes, and I appreciate the opportunity to present my side of the story," she replied. "I've brought documentation, video evidence, and statements from my neighbors, all of whom support the fact that Max is not a disturbance to anyone." Linda's expression didn't change as she gestured for Evelyn to proceed. Evelyn took a deep breath and began presenting her evidence. She showed the board her meticulously kept noise logs, detailing each time Max had barked and the brief durations of his vocalizations. She played clips from the video recordings, highlighting how Max would only bark when he was startled or when there was unusual activity around her yard. She also presented the written statements from her neighbors, who had confirmed that Max's behavior was well within reasonable limits and that they had never felt disturbed by him. As Evelyn laid out her case, she noticed a shift in the board members' expressions. Some of them nodded in understanding, and a few exchanged glances that suggested they were beginning to question the validity of the complaints against her. When she had finished, Evelyn looked directly at Linda, who was now fidgeting slightly. "Thank you, Miss Parker," Linda said, her voice a bit strained. "While your evidence is thorough, we do have a record of complaints from residents who have expressed genuine concerns." Evelyn felt her patience wearing thin. "With all due respect, Linda, I've spoken to my neighbors, and none of them have any issue with Max. In fact, they're here today to show their support." She gestured to the back of the room, where her neighbors sat. They nodded, offering encouraging smiles. Evelyn took a steadying breath. "If these complaints are legitimate, I'd like to know why I haven't been informed of who is making them. How can I address the concerns if I don't know where they're coming from?" Linda pursed her lips, clearly uncomfortable. The man sitting beside her, the stranger Evelyn had seen by her fence, leaned forward and cleared his throat. "Miss Parker," he said, his voice calm but with a hint of condescension, "we cannot reveal the identities of the complainants due to privacy policies, but we can assure you that the complaints are valid." Evelyn looked at him sharply, recognizing the tone as one used by people accustomed to wielding authority. "And who are you exactly?" she asked, unable to keep the edge out of her voice. The man gave a slight, self-assured smile. "I'm Robert Warren, a consultant hired by the Homeowner Association to assess noise disturbances and ensure compliance with community standards." Evelyn's suspicions deepened. "A consultant? So you're not even a resident of Willow Creek?" "No," he replied smoothly, "but I'm here to enforce the standards that residents have agreed to uphold." Evelyn felt her frustration mounting. "I don't believe a non-resident should have the authority to make determinations about what is and isn't a disturbance in our community," she said firmly, addressing the rest of the board. "This entire process has been based on vague complaints and arbitrary standards, and I have more than enough evidence to show that Max is not causing any real issue." One of the board members, an elderly woman with a kind face, raised her hand. "I think Miss Parker has a point. Her evidence is quite compelling, and I'm not convinced that these complaints are justified. Perhaps we should reconsider our approach to this matter." Linda shot the woman a sharp look but said nothing. Evelyn could tell that the board was beginning to sway in her favor, but she knew she had to drive her point home. "Furthermore," Evelyn continued, "I have video footage showing Mr. Warren here inspecting my property without permission. He's been near my fence multiple times, which feels invasive and is not something I agreed to as part of living in this community." A murmur spread through the board members. Robert Warren's face tightened, and he glanced at Linda, who looked visibly uncomfortable. "That's not exactly," Warren began, but Evelyn interrupted him. "I think the homeowner association has overstepped its bounds here," she said, her voice strong and steady. "I would like the board to consider revising its procedures for handling complaints and to ensure that residents are treated fairly and transparently. We deserve the right to know when our personal space is being monitored and why." The board members exchanged glances, and after a brief, whispered conversation among themselves, the elderly woman who had previously spoken up addressed Evelyn. "Miss Parker, we understand your concerns, and we apologize for any distress this situation has caused. It's clear that there has been some overreach on our part. We will review our policies and consider new guidelines for handling complaints and privacy issues." Linda's face was taut with frustration, but she remained silent, clearly realizing she had lost the upper hand. Robert Warren, meanwhile, looked as if he wanted to say something, but he refrained, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. Evelyn felt a sense of relief wash over her, though she maintained her composure. "Thank you," she said. "I only want to live in peace with my neighbors and enjoy my home without feeling harassed. I'm glad to hear that the board is open to making improvements." The board members nodded in agreement, and after a few final comments, the meeting was adjourned. As Evelyn gathered her things, several neighbors approached her, offering words of encouragement and congratulating her on standing up for herself. Miss Hathaway, the elderly neighbor who had supported her from the beginning, patted her on the shoulder. "You did wonderfully, dear," she said with a smile. "We're all proud of you. Max deserves to enjoy that backyard as much as you do." Evelyn smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "Thank you, Miss Hathaway. It means a lot to have everyone's support." As she left the community center, Evelyn glanced back at Linda and Robert Warren, who were talking quietly in the corner. They avoided her gaze, and she felt a renewed sense of confidence. She had confronted the homeowner association's overreach and won, but she knew that the victory wasn't just hers, it was a win for every resident who had ever felt powerless against those who sought to control their lives unfairly. In the weeks that followed, the homeowner association implemented new guidelines for handling complaints, requiring a minimum of 3 complaints from different households before taking action on issues like noise disturbances. Additionally, the board decided to limit the involvement of external consultants, ensuring that only residents would have a say in matters concerning the neighborhood's well-being. Evelyn's efforts had not only protected her right to enjoy her backyard with Max, but it also led to a fairer and more transparent community for everyone. As for Linda, she maintained her position on the board but became notably less involved in enforcing minor regulations. The incident seemed to have humbled her, and Evelyn no longer received any complaints or threats. Robert Warren, meanwhile, was quietly dismissed from his consultant role, and Evelyn never saw him near her property again. Evelyn's backyard once again became her sanctuary, a place where she and Max could relax in peace. On sunny afternoons, she would watch Max chase squirrels along the fence line, his barks echoing joyfully through the yard. She no longer flinched when he barked, and she no longer worried about unwanted letters in her mailbox. She had fought for her peace, and she had won, securing a little slice of happiness for herself and her loyal companion.